On today's episode, we hear George Takei make an off-color joke, see someone declare how they won't listen to the other side to understand their point of view, hear a contradictory standpoint on pandemic prevention between COVID and monkeypox, find a horrific take on why a life in a coma isn't really a life, and lastly, we take a look at a pathetic excuse-making GOP representative on inflation. This is Cringe Posts. Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of the Cringe Posts podcast. This is the show where we gather the cringiest political and cultural takes that we find in our feeds, and we take them apart. We tell you what's wrong with them, maybe explain some of those things that had you thinking, I know this is wrong, but I just don't know why. And of course, we like to have fun along the way. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host, Britt. And before we get into the episode, just a reminder to comment and share and like, all that good stuff, subscribe, rate it highly. It helps us out, and we love to see it. And of course, if you have any suggestions or, things where you think we go wrong, leave those as comments too, because we love to hear it all. Before we make fun of other people's takes, we like to get into our own. So we're going to start with a cringe post from our co-host Britt here, which you can see visually if you're watching our YouTube channel. And if you're not, but you still want to see it, go to cringepost.com and we've got the visual companion for you there. So this cringe post from Britt is back in 2011, and he tweets, I just completed a dream. Twittered 5 minutes before I take stage at Creation Fest. Smiley face, smiley face, smiley face. And what's great about this is, I mean, most of that's really cool. Like playing at Creation Fest, that's dope. A pretty big deal, especially, for doing that 11 years ago. That's pretty incredible. But you had to say you twittered 5 minutes before you take stage.
I saw this and I was like, oh, there's a bunch of smiley faces. I probably said something stupid. And I thought, oh no, that was actually a really awesome moment in my life, because I'd grown up going to that festival, and then to hop up there and there's, thousands of people and we get to play music in front of them. That's awesome. That's dope. And I don't know. I don't know why I said twittered. Like I had to confirm with you before the show. It's like, it was never twittered, right? It was always tweeted. And you made fun of me, calling me that was very boomer of me. And
yeah, the funny thing is, I almost feel like it sounds like a boomer making fun of being a boomer. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like where they intentionally say something like, "Oh, the World Wide Web," even though that's technically correct. Calling it that's a little cringy. But it's not. But you're not. You're not a boomer. I mean, last time I checked, and two. You're not trying to make a joke here. You just said twittered, which is pretty great.
I don't know why I would even think of it to call it that. Like Facebooked, like that's you write on their wall. That was what it was,
Right. The one that always bothered me from Facebook that people would say, and they still to this day do, although it's not the same level, is they would use friend as a verb. So, he friended me on Facebook. I'm like, No, he added you as a friend. It says add friend. The verb there is add. Don't turn.
Was that
friend
a MySpace thing? Did you have friends on MySpace?
I don't know. I wasn't allowed to. I wasn't allowed to have a MySpace, and
yes,
I made one
remember.
and never did anything with it. But yeah, so I don't know. Maybe. But the other thing is, this does make me think of a friend when the Nintendo Wii came out, and he was going to buy an extra controller. The sort of there was like a little folksy name that people came up for the controllers, which was it was called the Wii Remote. So they would call it the Wiimote.
Oh.
And he went up to the GameStop, desk and asked, and I think they were behind the things because they were in limited supply. And so he asked if he could buy a Wiimote, and the person gave him like the weirdest stare. And he's like, sure. And my friend's like, yeah, I was so embarrassed. I never said that again.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know why I said that. But it just was like, ooh, that's... and the fact that I'm, 19 or whatever it is, or 18 here is just embarrassing.
Hey, at least it's still coded in the actual cool achievement of playing at a big music festival. That's still pretty sick, especially at that age. So kudos there. It's more silver lining than not, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move to our first cringe post, and this is from frequent guest on the show, George Takei, who tweets, TBH, Matt Gaetz looks like a thumb with a mop atop it, but I doubt that would spare him unwanted attention in prison. And there's allegations right now going around about Matt Gaetz and potential trafficking and weird stuff like that. And frankly, as far as the moral character is concerned, I don't trust most politicians, and Matt Gaetz is not someone I would trust either. I think he's probably a scummy person because I think most people who want to get into politics are kind of scummy. But the absolute hypocrisy of a tweet like this is kind of wild, because Takei is, I mean, in a sense, he's just making kind of a rape joke. That's what he's doing. And then he's adding sort of a layer of homosexuality on top of it. And the thing is, these are the people who freak out when someone like Dave Chappelle makes jokes that are frankly based in reality, or point out realities around them, whether or not they are true. They freak out and they say it's awful, and then they just go around and do the same thing. And I think this is kind of a lame joke. I think even the substance of the joke is pretty lame, because you're saying this person's ugly and stupid, but also the bad thing that would happen to them if they looked good is happening. It's like you're taking both ends of the bad thing and trying to say he's stupid and ugly. And you're like, oh, okay, that's, that the punchline of sort of like a being attractive in prison joke relies on the sense of like, oh, he's a good looking person. But George Takei couldn't even handle that. He's like, no, he's also ugly. And it's like, oh man, even if the joke wasn't hypocritical to your standards, it's just an immature, dumb way to word that joke too. So it's not a good joke. And that's the difference in so many ways between people who get offended at jokes and then hypocritically make the same kinds of assumptions when it eases them, is they're not good at making them. And that's, I think, some of the reason why they have such backlash against people who make these kinds of jokes well, because they get attention, they get a reaction, and they don't get like applause. They don't get the, yeah, you're on the right side. They get the laugh because it points out something funny and is crafted well. Whereas this is just like, you're stupid. Clever, dude.
Well, I mean, this is a response. I don't know if you saw Matt Gaetz's like his speech. I can't remember where it was at, but I saw a clip of it. But he basically said, he's like, I don't know why these women that look like thumbs are worried about abortion. Like, you have to be pregnant before you even get it aborted.
Oh,
and
gosh.
That's crude, and I would never make that joke. But at least it's like comedy. At least it's in line with like there. It's not original, but there's a logic to it.
There's a setup and
a punchline, right?
Yeah.
And this is just mean spirited, as most George Takei stuff is. You posted that thing about him talking about being what was he lost his virginity to an attractive man when he was 13. It's like, oh, it's so interesting how this always goes one way. You and I are not huge fans of, maybe you are, I don't know, but Milo Yiannopoulos, I'm assuming you're not. No, but like, that guy got canceled, right, for saying basically the same thing, but because he was of the other persuasion. And it's just, you kind of see how the cultural wars and the cultural powers kind of all flow in one direction. And like you're saying, like George Takei is making a rape joke. Like that to me is worse than like, That's much worse than Matt Gaetz saying, "Hey, like you don't have if you're not going to get pregnant, like you don't really have to worry about abortion." Like there's some logic to it. Set up punchline. This is just like, I don't like this guy, and I hope he gets raped. Like that's not funny. You're just the only reason you'd find that funny is if you think it would be funny if that person was raped, and that's not cool. That's not. I mean, George Takei is not cool, other than when he was in Star Trek.
Yeah. So. Yes. Yeah, and. I think, if you take the worst of both of those comparative jokes, right? It's like Matt Gaetz it's like the worst punchline basically is you're ugly. And, that's not a nice thing to say about someone, but that's the worst it gets. And like you said, this one is, the worst is you think it's funny that this horrible thing is inflicted on another person. Now, I'm not policing what someone can or can't make a joke about. I might personally find certain things distasteful or not, but I think basically, free speech is free speech, and people should be free to express what they want. And if people find that funny and there's a market for it, let the expression happen. And then I'll do my best to say, hey, that's maybe not great dialogue or whatever for whatever reason, but never cancel these kinds of things. So, but that's the crazy thing, right? Like Matt Gaetz's joke is like, oh, you're ugly. This joke is like this awful, horrible thing I want to have happen to another person. So if your sort of political persuasion is the one that's saying horrible, quote unquote, violent things can't be said about a group of people, then you don't get to have the stance that it's okay to make up the joke about a horrible thing happening to a person, even if that you don't like that person, because that's actual violence. And so, by this really twisted logic, you have to be, and maybe many of them are, which is obviously a dangerous and terrible path to go down, but you have to also justify saying, I would be fine with there being no legal repercussions to inflicting violence on Matt Gaetz, for instance. And I think a lot of these unhinged people would claim that. I don't know how long they would stick to that when, they realize that the lens of who and who isn't virtuous enough to escape the sort of violent, you realize that the power dynamics shift on a whim, and you're going to get betrayed by what was once your allied group, if that's ever a government, or frankly any individual entity in power. So, okay, our next tweet comes as a reply to Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh had tweeted a little blurb about a recent appearance he did, or I think he interviewed someone on his podcast, either that or he went on someone else's, some left-wing guy, and he was talking about how they disagreed on a lot, and I got mad at him talking about things like paying for free college and gun rights and stuff like that. And he disagreed with me on this and that, but it was a great conversation, and we both left it heads up or whatever. And our take on Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh is not he's by no means anyone we're sympathetic with in most ways. He usually has pretty lame takes on things from our perspective. But this person replies to that tweet as in the following manner. I can't imagine being mad about free college. Why would that be a stand anybody wants to take? Dang it, I paid for college for 20 years, so everybody has to. I won't stand for this free college BS. I'm not going to listen to this whole show to understand how he feels about it either. So we've done college debt and free college takes before, and we probably will address that a little bit. But the specific thing that I found about just so illuminating was I'm not going to listen to this whole show to understand how he feels about it either. And you start the tweet with, I can't imagine being mad about free college. Well, if you can't imagine it and you want to criticize it, there's a really easy step to being able to imagine it and then take it apart more succinctly. So it'd be one thing if you just went in and mocked that point of view and that was it. It would be another thing to say, I can't imagine being mad about it, and then expressing your view. But to both say, I can't imagine this, and then throw up, something to make fun of, and then say, I'm also not going to listen, so you can't call me out on the inauthenticity of my complaint or whatever. That's just really funny. It's like saying, like, I cannot imagine anyone who would enjoy vanilla ice cream. Like, oh man, vanilla is so much better than anything else. I'm literally never going to eat anything else in the entire world. I'm only going to eat vanilla ice cream, and I'm not even going to try a steak. By the way, I'm never going to speak to anyone who likes vanilla ice cream either. Like, that's just absurd, and you're obviously a complete loon, and no one should take your views seriously. And that's what this person has very conveniently flagged for us, is to say, by the way, I'm going to criticize you, but I'm also not going to take the time to actually listen to what you have to say or your arguments.
Yeah, and I think this highlights just the lack of the currency of trust that we have in our country right now. Like Jordan Peterson has a really, really awesome monologue about how like trust is actually one of the most important currencies that you have in a society, because it enables so many things to happen, right? Like if I can sell something on eBay, someone's going to pay me and trust that I'm going to ship that, whatever they bought all the way across the country and vice versa. And so this person, how I know that they don't they have zero trust is that it's like they conflate a person having a policy standpoint of like, hey, I don't want to pay for free college, as in this person hates all college students or hates all people that are going to go to college, and they just want everyone to be poor, and all these things. It's like, no, have you ever considered that like you and I, if we were to take on the college debate, it's like, no, it's like, I want college to be cheaper. I want more people to be able to go to college. I want more people to be educated. I want more people to be as competent and as free as possible to go pursue everything that they want to pursue and make the world as awesome as it can be. And I think that by, canceling student debt and by subsidizing colleges, that makes it harder, not easier for them. And we would, this person, like, we have the same end goal. Like, let's argue about how we get there, right? And I think that but these, it's not even it's a non-starter, right? The second I say, hey, I'm not for us paying for college for students and canceling student debt, this person automatically assumes, because they don't trust anyone else, they've been so blinded by that that I just want people to be poor and I don't want people to go to college. And that's what's so unfortunate. You should, in this day and age, you should hardly ever say, I just don't understand why someone has this view, because you can Google and Steelman and understand why they have that view. You don't have to agree with it, but at least I can understand, why they do it. I understand why this person wants college to be paid for. Like, they think that it's going to yield better results with more people going, less people being trapped in debt after they get out of college. It's like, but this person could never describe my position for why I don't want college to be paid for back to me. And so that they're not really worth engaging with, but that's just something you should know, right? When you look at these posts or someone says, I just don't understand why you would hate, black people, or I don't understand why you hate college students, or I don't understand why you hate, XXXX. It's like what they're doing is they are substituting a caricature of who you are, and they're debating someone else that's not you when they say those things. They haven't actually taken the time. They're not interested in learning about your perspective. They're not actually interested in a good result. They're just so blinded by their ideology, and they're willing to use that as a club to try and beat you into submission.
Well, and not to mention that their inability to articulate and unwillingness to learn that, they then somehow view as evidence that reinforces their own viewpoint that the opposition side doesn't have an argument, or their argument is this, facade they've created in their head. It's wild. So you're like, oh, I'm not going to listen to your long-winded explanation of why this wouldn't work. And then you walk away from that, and then they sort of internalize, yeah, they didn't have a response for me. So there is no response for this. And when your ideology and your viewpoint of how things work is sort of a bumper sticker sized ideology and solution to whatever issue, it's very easy to, see that thrown around all the time. So it's like free college. That's a bumper sticker issue. But to explain, free college would actually devalue the currency of both college. It would devalue the currency in general. It would create an artificially high cost for colleges, because then they're not competing in any sort of frame, like worse than we have now with the loans, because that's already what's been going on. All these, like, none of those things are easy to put in the bumper sticker format, so you don't see them thrown around as casually, whereas you see all these just free college. And so, because I want to help someone, and so then they see that, they hear that, they don't do the work, and then because they don't do the work and listen, they think, yep, there is no just way. And you think I'm going to listen to a racist, like anyone who's slightly to the right of me? No way. I'm not listening to a racist. That's unethical. Therefore, they have no position. That's the way that these people operate in so many ways. It's like they don't hear it, and they refuse to hear it, so they don't hear it. And so then they think that there is no response other than the one that they've created in their head. And then they say that to their like-minded friends, and they spread that amongst themselves. So the only opposite perspective they're hearing is this red herring straw man argument that's been presented by their like-minded people who don't hold the opinion. And then they don't actually talk to the people who they deem as racist, bigot, whatever you want. And so then they never hear the real thing, except for this caricature. That's not the real argument. Okay. We'll move on to our next post. And these two are kind of related. They're not like inherently contradictory, but they're kind of multiple aspects of something. And it's from Senator Scott Wiener, I believe. We've had him on, or featured him on the show before. He wanted to make mandatory sex education, and drag queen story time would be included in that. So this Californian senator tweets, "Lots of sex shaming of gay men around monkeypox. The same shaming we saw in the 1980s re-HIV. Lecturing people not to have sex isn't a public health strategy. It didn't stop HIV, it made it worse. And it won't stop monkeypox. What will work is vaccination, testing, and education." And then there's a second tweet, unrelated, but again, sort of similar theming, so I wanted to address both. "It's time for California and San Francisco to declare a state of emergency on monkeypox. Monkeypox isn't contained. It's spreading, and we don't have enough vaccines or testing. A state of emergency allows flexibility on testing, contracting for services, and vaccine administration." So there's a lot of things to point out here. I think I'll start sort of with some broad themes and then hand it to you, and then we can sort of pick apart what's left there. But the first thing I'll say is it is so incredibly rich for this guy to say lecturing people not to have sex isn't a public health strategy. What do you think was maybe a more overreactive kind of response similar to this that was issued that he was fully supportive of in, I don't know, about, let's say, 2020? Anything come to mind? Oh yeah, maybe lecturing people not to do anything or go outside or go to work isn't a public health strategy. It's like, yeah. So the only difference here is that there is more concrete evidence that lecturing people not to have sex in public is a more discernibly effective tool at not spreading a disease like this. But this person only cares about it when it seems to target a specific subset that he views as oppressed. If it oppresses an entire population, or if it oppresses the working class more, but it's politically posh to support the policy, then it's okay to tell people, don't live your lives, don't go outside, don't do the things that make life worth living, and don't do the things that make life be, able to be lived as it is. Don't do these things. Those things are okay to shut down. However, how dare the public health officials lecture people to not have sex in public as a health strategy? That is wild. Just the complete contradiction of these two thought processes that one person has. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out. The second thing that makes me about the second tweet that I think is funny is throughout all this, there's these like, a state of emergency allows flexibility on testing, contracting for services, and vaccine administration. If it allows for these things, if it allows for extra testing or extra funding, why is it not done all the time? Just out of curiosity, I mean, maybe that's like because extra taxpayer funds are going to it. I don't know. Time. Right, exactly, yeah. But a lot of COVID emergency rule things, like in Washington State, removed the need for some like certificate of need issues and allowed like over borders type visits for insurance type things like that that were temporary. It's like, why are these restrictions here in the first place? They should be removed all the time. And so it's, I don't know, but it also makes me mad that this person's celebrating the state of emergency. There was a tweet later like, I'm so glad that we find San Francisco declared a state of emergency. I'm like, I'm sure you are. Power hungry
friggin' Emperor from Star Wars. Emergency powers will be given up at the end. What really strikes me about it is I went to the same thing that you did. It's like, lecturing people not to have sex. It's like, well, dude, your party, and I'm sure you did. I haven't seen his tweets, but like you probably lectured people to not go outside, not see each other, even if you didn't have COVID. From seeing people, it's like, that's not a health strategy either. So that's kind of weird. The other aspect of it too, it's like, okay, like I think it's somewhere in the realm of 80 to 90% of monkeypox has been transmitted from people having gay men having sex with multiple partners, right? That's how it's transmitted. And so it's like, okay, even if you're saying, well, it's just not gay men, it's just like, well, just don't have sex with multiple people, right? It's like, well, let's do anything but examine ourselves and take a look at like basically basic health practices to keep yourself healthy. And it's, these people bend over backwards to allow all sorts of debauchery and to never criticize, a certain type of behavior, even when there's a clear like adverse reaction to that behavior when you're implementing it. It's like, I saw someone post, I thought it was kind of funny, but they're like, hey, the best vaccination for monkeypox, and it's a picture of a heterosexual couple, basically that's monogamous, right? It's like, you won't have an issue with monkeypox most likely, statistically, if you are monogamous and you're in a monogamous relationship, gay or straight, in that way. And so it's so interesting. These public people, they always want to externalize the problem for their constituents. They always want to say, oh, it's those people over there, or it's this system over there, or it's any of these things. It's never like, hey, look at yourself, man. Like, look at what you're doing. Maybe you should stop doing that. If you're concerned about monkeypox, maybe you should stop doing, this action that really obviously results in that. But that would put on, personal responsibility onto the individual. And that's something that if more individuals took personal responsibility, people like Senator Scott Wiener would not have a job.
Yeah, no, it's totally exemplified in these things, in like him supporting things like emergency powers, where they get to expand and control more things like that. And I think that when you think about it, it's like, okay, if your state of emergency for this disease that you, again, like you said, could be curbed with personal responsibility, really, which again was what they were telling people to do when it required them to not live their lives, really. Like, I mean, that's huge, right? He's not consistent on that, but so the state of emergency that he's supporting allows flexibility on testing, contracting. It's like, if it allows flexibility on something versus, like, I don't know, adding funding or doing all those things, that's something that shouldn't be regulated in the first place. And this person should be advocating for the reductions in the bureaucratic level of that kind of thing, right? It shouldn't take an emergency or some sort of crazy big thing for there to be these allowances for flexibility in health issues. Because like, how much better would that if COVID, if we hadn't had all these certificate of need issues and had more hospitals and had more rooms and stuff, like, how much better would the COVID response have been, even with the authoritarian sweeps? Like, there were so many places complaining about full hospitals because they were putting, one patient every 12 feet around them or something, so they couldn't pack them in as much as they normally do. And so it's like, if you just had more physical buildings that you hadn't just artificially lowered the supply of to keep competition low, then we would have had more physical space for this sort of thing to be ready for and prepared ahead of time. So that's the one level of state of emergency that should be allowed. And the second thing, of course, is if it's a state of emergency that, once again, you want to control people through the use of emergency powers, like telling them that they have to spend in this way or they have to live in that way, then you're not really consistent on your practice of don't lecture people to not have sex. It's like, be consistent. Say that discipline would have helped COVID and will help monkeypox, or say that, like, during COVID, people should have been able to live their lives and do what they needed to do. And if you're at risk, evaluate that and make that calculation for yourself and practice smart practices. Like, if you are immunocompromised, make accommodations. And then also during monkeypox, do the same thing. Like, don't do very obviously stupid things that will result in you transmitting that disease. It's kind of like the same thing of someone being like, "Oh, wow, so you're saying, we shouldn't have locked down during COVID, but you're also telling people to lock down in a sense for this disease." And it's like, no, it's in the same way that I'm advocating that, anyone should be able to buy a chainsaw for their home to do home construction. I'm also saying that you should, when you're, using a chainsaw, you should wear goggles. You should take safety precautions. You should wear thick gloves. You should do things that are going to protect. But I also don't believe that should be mandated by the law, right? You can advocate for things that are smart and advocate for ways to avoid putting yourself and others in danger without legislating it and not even legislating it, right? Because most of this was done through, again, emergency powers. So you can do all these things without forcing people into them. But this kind of person, again, has the complete polar opposite views on the issue. The only thing that makes it different is if the actions that are required to prevent the spread target a subset of people that's politically popular to defend, even though it's not a religious statement to say that this is how the disease is spread. It is just a factual one. Okay, we are moving on to our next cringe post. This one so it starts with the New York Times reporting and then a comment on that post. So the New York Times posted on Facebook, the parents of a 12-year-old British boy in a deep coma who was determined to have severe brain damage lost an appeal to keep him on life support on Monday. His parents may try to take the case to the European Court of Human Rights, their lawyer said. And then the comment reads, why would anyone want to keep a person young or old alive who was severely brain damaged on life support? That's not life. That's life in the prison of one's own body, just because they can't let go. How tragic for all. That is one of the creepiest comments I've seen, and sorry to offend anyone who's on the edge of this, the natural evolution of the pro-abortion movement. It is. Because once you start saying that an unborn life is not a human life, or that if it's going to be born into a bad life, that's not really life, or any of those excuses that get used, then the logical jump only means that, well, he's brain damaged, so his life quality is going to be harmed, and so why would you keep him on life support? And that is the natural evolution of this line of reasoning. And I think it is disgusting, because no one, and this is maybe the most dystopian part of it all, is the fact that in the UK, it had to go to a court that for the parents to be able to keep him alive. And then maybe they get to appeal to the European Court of Human Rights. Like, holy crap. We are outsourcing our children to the government. And their best hope is for a European government entity. That is not the future that I want to move toward. That is horrifying. And I'm just saying, if I have the means to support my child through life support, I don't care what government body tells me I can't. I'm doing that until my son is awake and alive. And if he dies, he dies. But I'm going to do everything I can to keep him alive. And that's no one's call but mine and my wife's.
Yeah, and I could see an argument for, a consenting adult who has made it clear before they are in a comatose state that, hey, I don't want to be resuscitated. I don't want to be on a ventilator. I don't want to be, just let me go the natural path if I end up in a car accident or if something happens, right? But like a kid can't consent. Like there's no there. Then so that consent is given to the parents until that child is of the age of consent. And so it's them denying these parents' wishes to try and keep their child alive, to try to do their best to heal him, is the equivalent of someone that is, wants to stay alive, wants to be on life support, and then some doctor, because they have some, opinion, decides, no, we're just going to pull the plug, even though this person is on life support. And maybe not viable now, but that's what life support's for, is to keep you alive until you're viable, and then pulling the plug. And that's, like you were saying, that's the natural evolution of where this comes from. I remember seeing an article about how, Iceland was bragging about, there's some person from Iceland bragging about how they virtually eliminated Down syndrome from Iceland, because basically they catch whether the kid has Down syndrome in the womb and then they just abort it. I was like, that's not eliminating Down syndrome because you've cured it. You just murdered people that have it. And that's like that it's so creepy for them to view murder as a cure. There was this gal I was talking to a while back. We were talking about morality and God and all these things. And I was trying to establish like just a baseline of like, does this gal have like a view of objective morality? And she thought she did. I said, well, like let's find something we can agree on. Like, do you agree that murder is wrong? And she said, well, what do you mean by murder? I was like, well, just taking a life because you can, right? Not because there's any good reason for it. Not because, not even any good reason, just taking a life. And she's like, well, I think I'd be okay with murder in some instances, like if we had overpopulation, and I was like, holy cow. Like, and this gal, maybe 21, 22 years old, and so that's just there's a callousness that has seeped into our culture and into our young people, and it's driven by selfishness. This like, well, I need to look out for myself. What's my comfort, all these things, and once it seeps into, because through that you start to view all of the world through that lens, and anyone that stands in the way of your happiness or stands in the way or threatens your ability to be comfortable or accomplish the goals that you want is something that should be moved out of the way, even up into the point of killing it. And they had this a while back. I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago. There was a similar thing where the UK did not want these parents to. I think the parents wanted to like take their kid out of the country to get treatment someplace else, because there's another. I can't remember the exact story, but like there's another. There's another hospital in another country that said, hey, we actually can probably treat him and we'd probably keep him alive and you'd be fine. And then the UK hospitals basically say, no, like, we don't want you to do that. It's like, man, you want some really bad outcomes for people? Like, you start telling parents that they can't take their kid to go get saved, like that there's going to be a lot of bad stuff. And then these people are going to then flip it around and say, oh, like, look at how bad and crazy parents are. Like the state needs to be in charge of children. Like we're like 1 or 2 steps away from that. I think about like truancy laws and stuff here in the United States. Like I had a friend in my hometown who their parents basically said, hey, like, we don't want you to go to school for 3 weeks. We're going to go to Europe, and travel around. And then the school district tried to file, like, hey, your kid is not here. We're going to send CPS down there. And so it was this whole big ordeal. It's like, it's the parents' freaking kid. They can decide whether the kid goes to your indoctrination camp or not. For all you parents out there and new parents that are about to have kids in school, it's like, do not even get them into the system, because once they're in, the claws are in, and then things like this will happen. It may not be to this extent, but you will be giving up this say of how your child is raised and what is put in their brain, and then the state will raise them, whether they live at your house or not. The state will be raising them.
Well, and think about how this seems like such a hyperbolic example that people mocked when, even Obamacare was being floated around. They mocked, oh, the death panels. Yeah, that's going to be real. And it's like, look at that's the natural. Of course, that's what's going to happen, because just because you have a quote unquote universal system doesn't mean the opportunity cost doesn't exist. It's like there are always going to be trade-offs in this life, and there are always going to be resources used up. And so at the end of the day, at a certain point, it's up to you have to determine upon whom the responsibility lies to supply the resources and to make the decisions. And it's got to be the parents. Otherwise, it will be the state, and the state will have to make these decisions. There's no other logical outcome.
Did you ever read the book Winter Flight? Have we talked about that book?
No.
Man, I read that book in middle school, part of my homeschool education. And it was written in 1981, and it's about a society that has mandated abortion for people with birth defects. Or like if you're born and a genetic mutation or birth defect like presents itself, you are then, your nervous system is taken out, and then you're used as like for parts for people that are healthier that get injured and stuff like that. And I remember reading that and being like, man, this is crazy. I hope this never happens, and I remember talking about it at a public school, and someone's like, oh, that's just conspiracy. That's never going to happen here. And it's like, boom, here it is, right? Like this is mandated, by doctors, by the experts, euthanasia for people, and mandated slaughter. And it's like the only thing that's missing is that this poor kid is not going to be on a table being picked apart for parts. We're not that far away from that either. Like, it's wild.
Well, and the age aspect is the other creepy thing about it. Like the comment, I think, why would anyone want to keep a person young or old alive? Like, whoa. Like, even making this argument for an old person is still far beyond the pale to me, right? They're just jumping and lumping in the young. Just throw it in there, young or old, doesn't matter. And then listen to the the cognitive dissonance and the again, I think I've mentioned this on like the last 2 or 3 shows, but the continual effort to deconstruct and recreate definitional meanings of words to fit what they want it to mean. Listen to this dissonance. That's not life. That's life in the prison of one's own body. That's not life. That's life is literally the sentence you're saying. And you add the supplement, but you're saying, no, that doesn't count as life. But it is alive, but it's with these conditions, so it actually doesn't mean it's alive. That is just such an interestingly succinct example of them saying, that's not life, old, classic definition. That's life, new definition that doesn't have the same value and weight in the prison of one's own body. Therefore, it doesn't matter. It's the transition is right there where they're saying, no, life is not sacred. Life does not matter. And it's not really the old version of life that you mean. It's really this new version of life that isn't sacred. It's this damaged form that we can throw away. And we have the responsibility to. Absolutely sickening, absolutely disgusting. And, this person who's commenting, they're not probably not in the chair of power to make these kinds of decisions or to move culture in that way, but they are one of the useful idiots that's doing the on the ground work of redefining the words for them and adapting it in the masses in the same way that stupid trend words mean things. And, people said YOLO, which would have meant nothing to people 50 years ago, and everyone adopted it and then knew what it meant. This person is doing that work of redefining life per the will of the selfish people who don't care about individuals, who don't care about individual souls, and only care about how they are able to maximally control the population and control the power, the wields of power, whether or not that means, you know, a person has to die here or there who's innocent and should not have to. Okay, and our last cringe post comes from the majority, or I think minority, excuse me, the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, who tweets, "Every month, the American people know when they get their pay stubs, they're making less in real wages. They understand this simple truth. We can't afford Democrats' failed policies, but we are certainly paying for them." And then there's a graph attached which shows the decline of real wages due to inflation. And it shows in 2020, it starts up at 7%, and then it kind of dumps down and then slowly climbs back up to 6%. And then it drops down to 4%. And then in 2021, it shows Biden sworn in, and then a huge drop down into the wages falling all the way down to minus 4.4%. Again, this was a really good one to go to cringepost.com and view if you're listening to it so that you can see. But what's utterly insane about this, of course, is to say that the inflation is due to the Democrats. And I guess absolutely nothing happened prior to Biden being sworn in that would have caused a major downward spike in real wage value. And it has absolutely nothing to do with the COVID lockdowns and absolutely nothing to do with the largest printout of money in the history of the United States ever. Probably nothing to do with any of those things. Probably just because it's Biden was sworn in that everyone suddenly thought my dollar is now worth less. I think that's probably a more realistic explanation.
Yeah, I mean, you were making this joke before the show. It's like, oh, history starts when the red line starts there. You know, everything before good, everything after bad. It's like, no, like everything before led to that crash, and oh my goodness, like that red line will get lower, but it's going to be lower a year from now, and that will be something you can blame the Democrats on. But everything that's currently happening right now, you can blame on printing $6 trillion for everyone, you know, for not even for everyone, for all the big businesses and people that had, you know, connections to get, you know, this helicopter money was dumped on big businesses. They were able to go spend it wherever they wanted to, reap the value of having it. And now you, the normal person who only got $1,200, gets to reap the consequences of that money. And that is the deviousness of inflation, is that it's about who gets the money first, because the people that get the money first are the ones that get the opportunity to use it while it's still valuable. And then after they use it, it's no longer valuable, but they own all of the real assets. They own all of the things that actually maintain their value through inflation. And you are stuck with paper money that is worth less and less and less and less and less. And that's why, you know, inflation is a tax in a sense, but it's not a tax that you feel right now. It's a tax that you feel later. And the tax that is felt later is that red line. The Republicans are the ones that taxed you. The Republicans are the ones that let all of this stuff happen. Trump is the one that signed all the bills into place. And that red line is a result of that. And, you know, in a year-ish, year and a half, when that red line is further down, then you can start blaming Biden. But the same policies that Biden is doing right now are the policies that Republicans did. It's almost like there is no difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. They're just the same.
Well, and that's exemplified by how most of the Republicans, not all, there are a few who will tell you the right answer here, but most will not tell you the specific reason for inflation. They will say, I don't know, war in Ukraine, if maybe sometimes, which is not true. I mean, that's not great. It hasn't helped, but it's not the reason why. They'll say Democrat policies without being any more specific. They'll say new Democrat spending, which is true to a point, but mostly untrue as to why there's this specific inflation occurring right now. And the reason is, of course, is because they don't want to tell you what the Democrat policies are that are making real wages lower, because that's the same policies they enacted and want to enact in the future because it benefits them. I mean, think about it. Think about it even in this way. Like, think about, in the example you gave of the helicopter money, where the wealthy get the assets first. That even happens when the people who are in the whims of or realm of power, they do sort of like in speculative investing, and then the population gets an extra 1,200, and they know that there are going to be people who are like, oh, sweet, I'm going to put that all into something. And like people take advantage and like pump up something. Like a lot of the crypto crash was because of this over evaluation of stuff. And then the people who know that, like, okay, now that these people are getting this influx of cash, they're going to raise up these things artificially high, just like we've done with the dollar. And then they're going to cash out, buy real assets, and then everything crashes around them. They've got holdings that are guaranteed to give them return. They've got assets that have actual value, and people are left on, with all of their, money that was pumped into the economy artificially. One, devaluing everything, and two, wasted into speculative investments in many ways that the people in charge and who know better just took advantage of. And that's one of those things where it's like, look, I'm not saying there should be a law regulating it, because it's the government action that would cause so much of this in the first place. But it's one of those things where it's just a great example of the government doing something that artificially compels people to make mistakes. So it's technically of their own volition, but in the same way where, the government spread these absolute lies about COVID, and then certain businesses, voluntarily put measures in place for mask mandates. It's like, is it really voluntary when the government has been screaming that this is the deadliest disease since, I don't know, tuberculosis?
It's kind of like, it's like, hey, I'm going to put you in a pit, with a bunch of, flesh-eating ants, and they're crawling towards you, and you can stay in the pit, or you can hop out of the pit. And on the other side of the pit is a 1 in 10 chance that you're going to fall to your death, or whatever it is. And so like everyone in their right mind is like, yeah, duh, I'm going to go jump out of the pit and take my chances there, versus certain death being eaten alive by these ants. And that's what inflation is it's and money printing is what they're doing is they set up an environment where if you stand still, if you try and save your money, because at the rate at which they're printing money, you can't outsave it, right? That's why if you go to any sort of bank and you try and look at their savings account interest rate, it's like you're lucky if you get 1%. And then with the inflation rate being 9.1%, that means everything you've got, like you're losing money by letting it sit. So it's like, well, I better spend it. And that's what that's what this whole system is based on. The reason the government wants you to spend money is because the more you spend money, the more they can tax it, the more money they get, the more Nancy Pelosi gets to be able to be 120 million, worth 120 million dollars. All these different things, the more they're able to go implement their programs. And I mean, we're seeing the results of that, right? Like by destroying savings, you are essentially destroying the ability of American families to be self-sustaining, right? You're destroying their ability to plan for the future. For when there is an actual COVID where people actually need to stay home, no one's going to have any grain in their silos because you've incentivized them to spend it. And that's what, it's like, if we had an actual pandemic, let's say we have airborne Ebola, right? And everyone wants to stay home. It's like, well, we better sure hope that we've been saving. Everyone has, surplus value stored away so that everyone can stay home and wait it out. You don't have to work if that happens. But with inflation, they basically put people between a rock and a hard place. It's like, you got to do something. And there's a chance that you're going to lose your shirt on it, but it's sure as heck better than just losing 10% of your dollar every year. It's just rotting away. And in 10 years, you're basically whatever you earned is gone. Your chance is better spent speculating and potentially losing all of it than it is just standing still. And it's not a false choice. It's like they have no option, right? I don't like the crypto bros, but I also don't blame them. It's like you've been faced with this impossible choice, and you made the choice in the way that has maybe a chance of success, and it bit you, and that sucks, but I understand why you made that choice.
Right. Yeah. And that's totally it. And just to sort of wrap it back to the original post here, those policies are the ones that the Republicans put in, and none of the
family-oriented Republicans destroy the family savings accounts, making families dependent on the government. These guys are so full of BS, man. It's just not even. They say the right things sometimes, but they almost never ever back it up. And they do the exact opposite.
And yeah, and it's like they're always like, well, you know, as the Republicans, we support the child tax credit. It's like, okay, how about you just support not printing more money? Because frankly, I would rather take that, because that will promote a much healthier economy and save me a lot more money than your child tax credit will, even as bad as taxes are. So unless you have any last thoughts on a different branch there, I think we'll wrap it up. So thank you guys for listening to this episode. Once again, leave a comment, subscribe, give us a good review, and that helps us out. We appreciate it. We'll see you on the next one.